Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, That Model Railway Guy, for a little modelling project video today featuring one of my older layouts. Now, first off, this video has been sponsored by Creality. Obviously, they are very big in the world of 3D printing and also laser cutting too. And if you've been following this channel for a while now, you'll know that last year I got into laser cutting myself, seeing how it could be put to use for model railways. So when Creality approached me about doing another video for them, I was obviously really happy to feature more laser cutting on the channel. But with my main layout Pitley Steam Railway now complete, that doesn't really need any more work. However, some of you may have noticed Pickwick Yard just behind me, which was the very first layout I ever featured on the channel. I've got a little bit of an idea for something that I could do here, so let's dive in and I'll tell you exactly what I've got planned. So Pickwick Yard is a very simple layout that I assembled when I was first getting back into the hobby. It's made from spare parts mostly, the track is all second-hand, the buildings are mostly old card kits that I had lying around, the baseboard is an old shelf, and the back scene used to be a laminate floorboard. I've always thought though it wouldn't take much to upgrade the layout, and in fact it's the back scene I'm looking at today because I've always felt this could be improved slightly. So my intention is to build a set of terraced houses behind the yard to add a bit more depth to the scene, which you don't really get with this flat backdrop. Here's the design I've come up with, and you can see at its core it's a very simple front facade for a small terraced house with cutouts for windows and doors. There's also a mirrored version of this too, and each section will join together using the tabs and slots that match the brickwork at the edges. Now I will be doing more than just 2 of these, I think it'll be 10 in total to fill the gap behind the railway, and so that means I've got some internal support pieces as well. The outer ones of course will have that same brick pattern on them again, with the internal supports being blank, although some have cutouts to accommodate the thickness of the doors they'll sit behind. And speaking of doors, you can see I've got plenty of these as well as various windows too. These are actually the same designs that I used on my cottage build last year, and with everything being in the same scale, I was able to simply just reuse them for this project too. And then of course there's the roof sections that will go on top of the whole thing. Finally, to support the whole structure and bring it up to the height of the existing baseboard, I've designed this base plate with various slots to allow the main house structure to fit in. There's also some pavement strips too, just to give those a little bit of extra relief as well. And as you can see, there's a lot of different parts that go into making this design. I think this is probably the most complicated build I've attempted so far. So with that said, let's fire up the Creality Falcon 2 and get cutting. Okay, so these are the front facades of the building, so to speak, and you can see I've already given them a coat of primer ready for painting in a bit. You can see they've come out really nicely though, and now I can just simply glue the 2 sections together using some PVA glue. The tabs and slots around the brickwork are actually so accurate that I probably don't need glue, they fit together almost like a zip, but it's better to be safe than sorry. I can then glue all the sections together to make up long strips of housing. And to keep things manageable, I'll be working on this full street in 2 halves, which I'll join together later in the build. With a strip of houses all fixed together, I'm now going to paint all of this brown as a rough colour for the brickwork. I'm just using cheap brown acrylic paint here, and I will say that you do need the colour to be a little bit darker than how you want the end result to look. For example, I believe this is burnt umber with a little bit of black mixed in just to make it even darker. The orange colour of the primer also works well here for adding some natural variation into the colour, which will become more apparent later on. With the brown paint dry, it's now time to highlight the brickwork. To do this, I've mixed up some slightly beige paint, which I'll then paint all over the brown. A finger is then used to wipe away the excess from the surface, leaving only the paint in the engraved lines that make up each brick. One thing you do have to be aware of though is that the brown base layer needs to be fully dried, not just touch dry but all the way through, which can take up to 24 hours or even longer depending on your environment. Another option, and one that I often use when I'm working quickly, is that once the paint is dry to the touch, I give it a quick spray outside with some matte varnish to seal it. This way, when we wipe off the excess paint for the mortar courses, we don't start taking off the brown base coat underneath by accident. This is a really effective technique, and it works just as well on laser cut brickwork as it does on embossed plasticard sheets. With the mortar now all highlighted, you can see that this does lighten up the face of the brickwork quite a bit, which is why I suggested that you make your base colour slightly darker than what you want. I'm also going to paint these areas above the doorways too, just for a little bit of variation. Now it's time to glue the doors in, which you can see I've painted in a variety of different colours. Again, using some PVA, these just fit in behind the openings on the main house section, and then the position can be fine-tuned from the front. The windows can also be fitted at this stage too. I did have a bit of an issue with these as the spray paint I used on them ended up being a bit thick, and that means that some of the parts aren't as clean as I would like. As a result, I can't fit any glass in behind the windows on this build at the moment just because it wouldn't sit flush against the rear, but I may be able to figure out a solution in the future. With the windows and doors in place, I can now add some of the extra detailing, starting off with these little archways that sit above each of the doors. In reality, I think these are probably a bit fancy for a row of terraced houses sat next to a railway yard, but I'm using a bit of modeller's license here because I like how they look. And with that done, I then need to add all the windowsills, which again give the exterior of the building a little bit of extra depth. Before I fix these houses onto the base, I also need to add the sides too. These have been painted in the same way as the rest of the brickwork and just can be glued together again using those interlocking bricks. As I said at the start of this video, this episode has very kindly been sponsored by Creality, who, as you may know, are a very big name in the world of 3D printing, but more lately they've also been making a name for themselves with laser cutters too. I have to admit, I looked around various different companies that make laser cutters, and I genuinely do think that the Falcon 2 is one of the best options on the market. Unlike a lot of other laser cutters, it comes pretty much fully assembled. All you really have to do is just plug the laser module in and power the machine and you're good to go. It takes about 30 seconds and there's no faffing around with like having to build the frame or anything. It's pretty much ready to go out of the box. And honestly, it's really changed the way that I think about building models too. As much as I enjoy building kits, a lot of the time you can't find something that's exactly what you're looking for. So either you end up having to sort of alter the kit, or more often I would end up scratch building stuff out of bits of card and embossed plastic sheets. Now though, I can just easily design whatever I like and have it cut in no time at all, and it's much better than anything I could ever scratch build. I know that 3D printing is kind of a hot topic in model railways at the moment. It's getting a lot of attention, but I do think that laser cutting is a bit of a sleeping giant, really, especially now that they're so much more easy for casual users like myself to operate. And like I said, I think Creality is at the forefront of that with products like the Falcon 2. So if you're thinking of giving laser cutting a go, I would definitely check out the Falcon 2, or maybe even the new Falcon 2 Pro that's just been released too. Again, thank you so much to Creality for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to making those terraced houses. So this is one of the base plates for the street, and you can see it has plenty of slots and marks cut into it for where the tabs on the buildings will fit in. First though, I need to glue on the supports to the underside, which will just raise the whole scene up to the same baseboard level as Pickwick Yard. Where the buildings themselves have been cut from 1.5mm board, these supporting pieces are all cut from 3mm plywood for extra strength. With the base now assembled, I'll paint the top surface grey just to create a rough representation of the road in front of the houses. If I wanted to go all out with this project, I could add some powder to create a bit of texture here, but as this is a quick build, this should do for the moment. And while I have the grey paint mixed up, I'll also cover the pavement strips in this same colour too. Once the grey has dried, I then just use a black wash on these strips to bring out the cracks between the paving slabs. It'll also introduce a bit of variation to stop the pavement looking too nice and clean. While those dry, it's now time to fit the houses in position on the street, and again I'm just using some glue on the underside for this. The whole thing then just sits down onto the base, with the tabs on the bottom fitting into the slots cut into the surface. And again, because these are all laser cut, the positioning is really accurate. I then also have the supports to fit in behind the front facade. As I showed earlier, some of these have slight variations and cutouts to allow for the different thicknesses where they fit in behind doors. These will also hold up the roof sections too, making sure they're fully supported all the way along. Speaking of the roofs, I'll paint these in the same way I did the pavements, first by giving each section a coat of grey. And again, once that base layer is dry, I'll then go over this with a black wash, although I'm being a bit more heavy with this than on the pavements, as I definitely want the roofs to look darker. Back with the main scene, I'll now glue the pavements in place using PVA. And of course I could have just cut the paving slabs directly onto the base plate, but this way I get that little step up from the road to the pavement. With that done, I'm now going to glue the two separate sections together to make one big long scene. As before, the houses have interlocking bricks, but this time I also need to make sure that the tabs and slots on the base plate interface correctly too. And while this dries, I'm just going to add a bit of scenic mud along the very front edge. This will just help it blend into the existing scenics of Pickwick Yard, although in reality it's unlikely to be seen anyway, as this edge will mostly be hidden by a fence. I'll also add some PVA along the supports so that I can fit the roofs in place as well. Some of you may have noticed that the pavements have holes in them, and that's so I can fit these lampposts. These were sent to me a while back from Model Signs, and I've been trying to figure out a way of featuring them in a video, and this street scene seemed like the perfect opportunity. These are actually the classic concrete style lampposts that you used to see ages ago. In fact, the street I grew up on had these sorts of lampposts, and they do have an LED installed too, which is why they have wires coming out of the bottom. On that note, you may also be able to see that each lamp has a resistor pre-fitted, so these can be powered straight from 12 volt DC, which is a nice little touch that makes these really easy to add to a layout. You can see all the wires pass through some holes in the base plate supports, and that's so that I can feed power in from one end of the scene. And with that, it's time to fit this street scene onto Pickwick Yard. Sliding the buildings in here between the main layout and the back scene, you can see this adds a really nice amount of depth to the backdrop of the layout. And the lamps are wired up too, so let's see what they look like. Yeah, a really nice orange glow there, very reminiscent of the sodium style lampposts that used to be all over the place. And one other little trick I have up my sleeve is to use a mirror to extend this scene off into the distance as if it carries on behind the rest of the layout. So yeah, I'm really pleased with how this project has turned out, and I think it makes Pickwick Yard look a lot more interesting. It had always bothered me how flat the back scene looked, and it's really nice to give this area some more depth. Of course, it would absolutely be possible to scratch build something like this too, but having the laser cutter just made it so much more easy, and honestly, the results look really good as well. Certainly with a project like this where you need to make multiple copies of certain parts and be sure that they're all exactly the same, the laser cutter is absolutely crucial here, and I'm honestly really glad that I have a tool like this in my arsenal. Should you want to get one for yourself, well, there's some links in the description where you can find out more information, and thank you again to Creality for sponsoring this video. That's it from me today though, so thank you so much for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!